Thank you, Stefan. So now my name is Berkers, and I'm a PhD at the business school. I'm in my first year, and I'm currently working on job analysis, but I could still be converted to the field of person-environment fit. And the nice atmosphere the last 2 days is really inviting, so you never know. So I'm going to talk about person-environment fit, but through the lens of job analysis, because that's my field. So I'll provide you a peek to what we see when we see these demand-ability fits. And I want to see if I can give you some lessons that could help evolve the field further and to create more objective or better objective measures. And I also invite you to do the same for me. So lessons that I can learn from the person-environment fit literature to see if we can make job analysis better, because we're definitely not there yet. So when I look at demand-ability fit, it's about when people have the skills, knowledge, ability, and other resources that are required by their job or their environment. And I say both because a job is not, it doesn't consist in a vacuum, so it's both. And then we have demand-ability fit. So we have some sort of demands from the job and the environment and a person, and we want to see, do they match up? Is it a good fit? And then when I look further, I want to see, well, how do you measure this kind of stuff? And this we already discussed, so I'm not going to over it very extensive, but you have this perceived fit, where you, for example, test to ask people, well, is the match between the demands and your knowledge and skills, is it good? So you have one person who looks at the fit part and gives some sort of idea about that. Then we have the subjective fit, where you assess if there is a discrepancy between the idea of the person about their own description and about the description of their demands. So you have one person who looks at both, and you're going to see, well, do they match up, or is there a big gap? And then we have objective measures for demand-ability fit, where you have a different source for the two. So you have one person, often from the organization, who says something about the demands, and then you have the person who does the job to say something about the abilities. And this is where my interest got captured, because saying something about the demands of the job, that looks quite a lot like job analysis. So maybe there's a point where the two can meet, because job analysis is all about defining a job in the terms of the necessary behaviors and capabilities for effective performance. In other words, understand what's demanded. So this is not something that I thought of. I wish I had, but it already been done. For example, by a study of Caldwell and O'Reilly, they did this. So they used job analysis to say something about the demands. So what they did and what mostly happens in job analysis is that you're going to gather data. So traditionally, you're going to talk to job incumbents to say, well, what are you doing in your job? You're going to talk to their supervisors, etc. So you gather data, you're going to generate items. Okay, what is all the stuff that's been done, and what's all the stuff that you need? And you're going to check, is this a complete list? So you go back to the incumbents, back to the supervisors, and maybe have a group discussion. Look, do we have your complete job here? Do we have everything? And then, because you don't want to bombard these persons with all the items, that could be a list of around 300 things, you're going to check, well, what's the most important? That's only one way to do it, but often, in this case, they looked for importance. So what are the most important things that you need to do your job? And in this case, that resulted in a list of knowledge, skills, and abilities that were necessary for performance. So they gathered this by doing this job analysis. And then you have, from job analysis, you go to these demands. And then you have the person again, who's going to rate their own performance or their own stance on these knowledge, skills, and abilities. Looks good. So what can we learn from job analysis? Well, the job analysis literature is quite extensive. It's around 100 years of literature. So one thing that you can definitely learn from that literature field is the systematization of the process for reporting requirements. So this part, where you're going to gather data, how to generate items, how to score the importance, there has been a lot of research on that part. So if you want to do this and use job analysis to look at demands, look at the literature, because then you know what are good sources. Maybe sometimes humans who do the job seem like a logical source, but they are not always the most reliable source. So we can learn from that. But what I think is most interesting is that we can learn to understand and improve the language for operationalizing the demands and ability side. So I say both, and I will come back to that later. So in the previous example, they talked about knowledge, skills, and abilities. But that's only one way that we can make this list. So the list that we put under the demands and under the ability side, you can do it in many ways. You can talk about tasks, knowledge, skills, and abilities, but how about work context, the machines, tools, and equipments that you use, the relationships that you have at your work? The sky is the limit. And it's been hinted at that it's a good idea to not do those things in different languages, but instead use one language to talk about both people and the situations instead of doing them in a separate set of variables. Because then you're going to compare apples and oranges, which is difficult. And this is something that job analysis as a field has also been struggling with. How can we provide a link between what people are required to do and what people actually do? So the match, for example, between tasks and certain skills that you need. Finding that link is very difficult. So why not talk about in the same language? But then what language do you choose? Are you going for the apples or the oranges? And not only just because you like apples, but should be a better choice. So this is what I kind of started doing in my study. And I started to look at job information, which is basically all the work-related information and data that's out there. So that's the stuff, the tasks, the job context, etc. And you can divide those in different categories or information types. And there are a lot out of there. And that's kind of the problem. There's a lot of them. And it's not clear anymore what's out there. And so what I wanted to do is give a systematic overview or review of those job information types in order to provide some sort of a framework for understanding the different information types, what's out there, and their relative use. Because they're not, you cannot say that they're equally useful in understanding the job. And it's not out there, so now you just have to search for yourself or understand what we need. So what we actually did is, for now, I have a sample of 50 studies from the job analysis field from 1980 to now, and not before, because the type of work has changed, so we want to make sure that it's relevant for the type of work that people are doing now in organizations. And for each study, I started to code for different information types. So I started to look, do they talk about tasks? Did they look at competencies? Did they look at personality? And every time I found one, I coded those. So there are certain lessons that we can take away from that. And the lesson one is, you can definitely overdo it. So after those 50 studies, I already found 160 different ways for describing jobs. And then you can ask, is that really necessary? This morning we talked, Sander talked about the amount of people that you want applying for a job. You don't want the 200 people. You want the 20 people that are really good. And I think the same accounts for the job analysis and the job information types. You don't want 160 different ways that could be interesting for understanding a little bit, but they don't give a good story. So we definitely went for quantity, and that's causing more confusion than it actually helps now. And it's becoming even clearer when we look at the second lesson. So the second lesson, I think, is that semantics matter. John already discussed it yesterday. It's very dangerous when you talk about stuff, for example, fit, or in the case of job analysis, about work or work requirements, stuff that we use in our normal language. And then everybody has their own interpretation. And when we look at, for example, some of the related information types, such as human attributes, competencies, and worker requirements, it's kind of small, but if you look at the definitions, they're different. They all kind of talk about knowledge, skills, abilities, and other requirements, or other characteristics, but in a different way. In worker requirements, they all of a sudden add education. And when you look at competencies, it's also knowledge, skills, and abilities, but then from the perspective of superior performance compared to average performance. So it's not the same, but it's very similar. And this is where it gets tricky, because are we really talking about different things, or are just the same thing with a different label? And if you have 160 things with different label, I mean, we could improve something there. So it really matters how you define it. And then I start looking at, when I looked at the demandability literature, I also found a little bit the same. But it's really about problems caused by just basic terminological confusion. And this is not something that has been there for the last 10 years. Now, this is something for decades already, and we haven't been able to solve it. So it's really something. And in the demandability fit literature, I kind of found a hint of the same thing. So when I saw that, for example, abilities include skills, knowledge, time, and energy the person can draw upon. Okay? This for me already found tricky, because abilities are defined as skills and knowledge, which for me are not the same. And when you then look at how they're operationalized, is by only the skills. So what happened to the knowledge, time, and energy? Do you really get everything then, or what's happening here? And then another one, somebody else said, well, abilities, we're just going to look at the abilities. And then the rest under it disappeared, or is it just something else? So this is where you get an idea of that it's tricky, and you should be aware. And it gets even more trickier if you know that skills and abilities, they are not the same, so it matters which one you choose. And that's lesson 3. So you have to make careful choices. So when I looked at the different information types, and this is more recent research in job analysis, is that they're getting an idea of how they differ. So for example, for different purposes of job analysis, and job analysis serves a lot of different purposes, for example, selection, training, compensation, and some kind of information types are more useful for the one than for the other purpose. For example, for training, we might want to know what kind of skills do people need, or what kind of tasks do people perform. Well, for selection, I might want to know what kind of personality somebody has, so I can fit it into my organization. And also, if you choose a different information type, it can result into different conclusions, leading you to cluster jobs that under one information type would not be clustered as similar. And if you look at, for example, a competence, you say, well, it's basically the same. So it matters. And especially if you look at bringing those information types to somebody who's going to rate it and look at it, it's going to do something else as well. For example, when we look at tasks compared to abilities or competencies, people will rate more abilities than they actually have in their job, just because it's socially desirable to say, well, I'm definitely doing something with supervision. I have an overview, I need that, and people are going to tick it. So there's something happening there as well. And this is something that I'm still working on, so it's work in progress, but we want to see, and it's kind of the next step, well, can we evaluate those information types? So can we say that there's a difference? And it's especially going to be a big difference between, for example, observable work behavior and very distant abstract traits. So, but it matters. So we can't just say, well, I'm going for the oranges because I like the color orange. You need to make a careful choice. So what I believe that we can learn is that, first of all, don't overdo it. Don't start creating 160 ways to come up with demand stabilities fit, because in the end, nobody knows what you're talking about anymore, and it might be just too much. Also, don't get caught in this so-called morass of semantic confusion, where you have slight variations and it's not sure if is it really something different or is it the same. And that will be, especially when you talk about abilities, but you mention skills, it's getting confusing. And last is, don't underestimate the consequences of your choices. We believe you cannot say that tasks and work context and personality, they have the same consequences, because we have seen that in job analysis they don't. So that's what I think that maybe you can learn from job analysis, and it doesn't mean that we have solved this already. We haven't, and I'm trying to hope that I can solve it in 3 years. Well, that's a little bit ambitious maybe, but maybe with your help from person-environment literature, maybe we can start doing something. But before we go into that, I want to give you a sneak peek of the presentation that we're going to give tomorrow for those who are there, and the things that we're doing now to make that demands part, to getting that even a little bit more objective. And that's because we're going to use text mining. So what I'm doing together with Vladimir is that we want to have these online vacancies, which are by no way the most objective source, but we have a lot of them. So from the nice guys from Monster, we got a lot of vacancies. And when a lot, I really mean a lot. So what we do there is that we process the text of those vacancies, especially the job description part. And that means that we remove stop words. We make sure that the computer knows what a sentence is, what a word is. And then we can build algorithms to get, for example, knowledge, skills, and abilities from those vacancies. So it's not just based on my job analysis, or maybe with a group of people, but you can get them from online automatically. And we're already doing this. So we now have an algorithm that can get from vacancies the activities, so more on the work behavior side. For example, my activity is to provide leadership, or I'm responsible for the delivery of all project deliverables, etc. And also on the other side, so the person side. And the next step is to make it finer, but so now we can already say, we can see, well, strong leadership skills, that says something about the attributes of the person. So next step is to make it smaller, and maybe we can make that demand side even a little bit more objective. Oh, thank you very much, and I hope to hear your reaction.